But the CIA is an organization that is what is known as the shadow government. You don't know who they are. You don't know where they are. But you certainly know what they're up to in many ways. They are Big Brother. That is Big Brother in many ways. Mm-hmm. So without further ado, former CIA officer for 27 years who knows the ins and outs of the deepest rooted secrets within our federal government and beyond. Ray McGovern, welcome to Generational Change.
Thank you, John.
Peter.
He's Peter.
Oh, you're Peter.
That's Peter. John's our producer.
Oh, okay.
And I'm Peter. Jen.
I think I probably should explain my unkempt nature here.
I think it's great. It's like the Grizzly Adams thing.
I just want a present. I don't ask for much. Just one present.
Actually, it's disheveled in memory and in solidarity with my good friend Julian Assange. This is the way he looked when he was unceremoniously dragged out of the embassy on April 11th, 2 years ago. So this is 2 years worth, and I'm really, really hoping that I'll be able to shave it off soon, although things are not looking good for Julian. So with apologies, I can speak through my beard.
No, we are big supporters of Julian Assange. We actually did a telethon in support of Julian Assange. I'm currently scrolling for everybody who hasn't done it yet. The Department of Justice comment line, we're scrolling it below. Please call them and tell them to drop the case against Julian Assange. Please do that. Anyway, sorry.
No problem. I just had to explain that because I look a lot different. Well, otherwise.
You look wiser.
Ray, I think a good place to start, obviously, is the Assange case. It appears that, one of the things that obviously the power brokers and the federal government like to do is, conjure up any type of, possible type of evidence that they can against somebody that they want to have taken down. It appears that this, this particular person that they were working with is somebody who is very unscrupulous, and that's putting it in a nice way. It appears this whole case has been falling apart. Now, I'm curious if it's at all possible that maybe there could be a bright enough light shined on this case where they simply say, yeah, we've kind of lost the narrative. I think we're going to have to just we're either going to have to let Assange go. I think the most likely scenario is that they'll basically say, we're just going to have him go back to Australia and they'll deal with him there. And of course, that's most likely where he'll either be under house arrest or something simple. Or are they going to come up with some new tactic to try to keep him in just forever isolation, so to speak?
Well, the British are going to do what we tell them to do. The people in charge in Washington want to get Julian. They want to make an example of him so no one will ever even think of disclosing war crimes by U.S. troops again. That's what Julian did. He also revealed all manner of secret tricks that the CIA and the NSA were up to. That, too, is verboten. So, pure and simple, they're trying to make an example of him, and that the vassal government in London will do what they're told. Now, it gets extremely uncomfortable when their latest indictment, of course, falls apart. The part about, him hacking into government computers in Iceland and all that kind of stuff. And by any rational legal standard, he should be freed. But hey, 800 years after the Magna Carta, where English nobles wrested some rights from King John, where are the English nobles now? There aren't any. They're sycophants. They're so obsequious to what the U.S. wants to do that they'll do anything. So, talk about rules-based, talk about lawful things, forget about it. They're going to get Julian. And I fear that their real game is just keep him from court to court, keep him from jail to jail until he expires.
Yes.
That would do them just fine. And that's really painful. So the solution, now, Peter, you asked what we should do. This is it, folks. This is not only for Julian. This is for the First Amendment. If we don't get off our patooties and get out there and make our views known to our congressmen, senators, and everyone needs to know this, then it's on us. I have a favorite expression. I call it the Noah principle. Okay. Now everybody complains about what's happening to Julian. Well, Noah principle is this: no more awards for predicting rain. Awards only for building arcs. Okay, we got to build some arcs. We got to step up to the plate now and save Julian if we can, and certainly make it clear that we consider the First Amendment and the Magna Carta still operative.
Yeah. You're sounding like, when we first started talking, like you're a little bit discouraged about the recent, information coming out about this witness. But wouldn't this be basically something where, like, to me, what it looks like is this is a way for the Justice Department to bow out and save face and basically just say, yeah, well, it was that guy. And so now we can drop this because really it was Trump's Department of Justice that really then appealed that decision. And maybe they just, at this point, are willing to let it go, but they can't look like they're willing to let it go. So that's why this guy is coming forward now.
Well, you might be hopefully right, but all indications are that a considered decision was made by the Justice Department under Biden to pursue this thing. A lot of people whose access were gored by Julian Assange. The whole deep state has it really in for Julian. So even if Biden wanted to do the right thing, I don't believe he could without risking really bad repercussions from the deep state.
Yeah. I think that it was one of the things that I did appreciate about Obama is that he didn't pursue this. Granted, he didn't do anything to solve the problem, but he didn't pursue this. And I do think that Merrick Garland is a fairly reasonable person. I think that there is an opportunity that there might be where there wasn't a couple of years ago. So I think that's the importance of really pushing now, because certainly there's a better chance now than there would have been 2 years ago.
Well, I agree with that. I'm ready to see if Garland is any different from his predecessors. So far, he's not shown me much. So there is reason for hope here. It's just that, if Americans don't know about this, this whole story in a very reputable Icelandic journal is almost 2 weeks old now. In other words, the foundation of the superseding indictment has fallen flat in its face.
Right.
Does know that? No. Why? Because it hasn't been in the mainstream media. No one knows that. People who read the New York Times think they're reading all of the news that's fit to print. Forget about it. They don't know about that. They don't know about a lot of things. And the ability of the press to suppress this kind of information, well, if I was, if I were a person likely to depressed, I'd be very depressed at this.
Yeah, we see the power of corporate media, and one of the biggest things that I know you spoke out against was the whole Russiagate nonsense and how they were able to basically take our attention away from real wrongdoers and say, "Oh no, it was them, it was them," and we just all watched that, and I felt like I was watching it in slow motion, and I'm like, didn't we fall for this before, like lots of times, and we're doing it again, and so yeah, I think the mainstream media, they're just stenographers.
Well, that's right, and the problem is that when I go back up to New York, where I was born and where I was educated, I talk to my old friends, and they're still in the mode of reading the New York Times and believing it and not believing anything that they don't see in the New York Times. It's bizarre. These are very well-educated people, okay?
Yeah.
There's one woman, and this is perhaps apocryphal, but she was told, you've been brainwashed. You've been brainwashed on all this mainstream media stuff. And she turned and she said, look, I'd know if I were brainwashed because I read about it in the New York Times.
That's irony.
You know, I always find that I have a lot more scorn towards liberals than I do towards conservatives, because liberals fancy themselves as being well-read, well-informed. Conservatives tend to have a much more simplistic approach to things, which is probably why they're more easily manipulated by carnival barkers, if you will. But there are a lot of people who are on the liberal side that are in the big cities like New York, like Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and so on, where they kind of have this attitude of, well, the whole world revolves around us and we know what's best, and don't even attempt to show us something otherwise because it's blasphemy. And I think that that's kind of where a lot of that comes from. And I'm guessing that this is something that you have seen for years. And in a way, it just kind of makes it easy for the shadow government to do what it wants to do, because people will buy this stuff. They don't question the New York Times. They don't question the Washington Post. They just assume that it's true.
Well, it's part of the shadow government, of course. The media is. I have an acronym that was blessed by the likes of Stephen Cohen, professor of Russia for a long time, and Pepe Escobar in the other end of the spectrum. And it's the Mickey Mat. Now, if your viewers have a pencil, please bring it out, because this is what it is. Mickey Mat rhymes with Mickey Mouse. Easy to remember. The military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank complex. Mickey Mat. Why do I say media? Because media is the cornerstone. Without the media, it doesn't work. And the media is controlled by the rest of the Mickey Mat. Mickey Mat, of course, is an elongation of what Eisenhower talked about, the MIC, the military-industrial complex. It is more complex now, if you will, but it's easily identified. They're the ones that are running this country. It's been very clear to me for years.
Speaking with Ray McGovern, former CIA officer, contributor to multiple outlets. I'm curious, a lot of people have soured to some degree on the squad, if you will, in terms of what they were sent to Congress to do. There is this joke, if you will, that as soon as you get to a federally elected office, you're basically put in a private room where they show you the other angle of the Zapruder film and just tell you, do you have any questions? Okay, now you work for us. Now
right, well, and the entire orientation is by all the lobbying firms and the big money interests, and that's who sponsors all of the orientation, right?
But what I am curious about, Ray, is there something that you can shed light on as to why they basically have gone silent and why they don't take any real political chances?
You mean people like AOC?
I'm just putting it out there.
Well, she's from my native Bronx, so don't expect me to say anything about AOC. I have to sort of pass on this one. I have no expertise in internal.
Yeah, I don't know why. Like, I have a much better whole selection of things. I mean, this is like a wealth of opportunity, especially for someone like you, Peter, who's like such a history dork. I would think you would be asking all sorts of questions. Like,
I would just get, hey, listen, I don't know if we got him for 5 minutes or 50 minutes.
No,
but I figured I would just throw
this
that
is
out
more
there.
important. Like, I would ask, so Ray, for people who don't know, Ray, you served under administrations ranging from John Kennedy to Bush Sr. That's correct, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So which of those administrations did you find the most challenging? Like, what was it, where you were, like, in your position, what did you find the most challenging thing, like in a behind the scenes way, of any of those administrations?
Gosh, that's really hard to say. During my later years, I was briefing the President's Daily Brief to Ronald Reagan's 5 most senior policy advisors, including Vice President George H.W. Bush. That was a challenge. I mean, it was a welcome challenge. Every other morning downtown, going around to 3 or 4 of those people. We worked in teams. It was a special challenge because my expertise is in Soviet history, Russian history. You know something about the Soviet Union? I did then, and I still know something about Russia. Now, what was the challenge? Well, the challenge was that Russia was changing, that this fellow Mikhail Gorbachev came on the scene, and he was going to change everything in Russia. He was very, very different. And I could tell in my people I relied on, my colleagues, that they could affirm my views. So when I was briefing the Secretary of State or the Vice President, and they wanted to know whether Gorbachev was the real deal, I said, yeah, he is. Take advantage of it. Negotiate with him. Maybe you can get some arms control deals. And they would look at me quizzically and they'd say, well, that's not what your superiors say. I was working for Bill Casey and Bobby Gates at the time. And I said, well, you asked for my opinion. I don't always agree with my superiors. So that was heady stuff. And by, George Shultz, the Secretary of State, was able to get more credibility with Ronald Reagan. And out of that came some really, really important arms control measures that were agreed to by both sides, including the destruction of a whole class of short-range and medium-range ballistic missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads. It was a big deal. So in terms of challenges, that was one challenge that I really welcomed. And man, that was good duty. It was a real high.
That's really cool.
Ray, I am a history buff.
I know. That's why I don't understand why you're not like digging in that.
Well, I'm letting him speak. You don't have to. I like hearing what you have to say.
Let me ask how much time we have here.
You guys have as much time as you like.
Yeah, we're just shooting it. We're just.
I've always been of the belief that the last president we had that actually did what he wanted to do was Jack, and I think he paid for it with his life. And I think ever since then, there basically has just been this notion of the president is basically a figurehead. Yeah, they make decisions, but they're really making them based on the interests of people that you don't know and don't see. Is there anything valid to what I just said?
When you say Jack, you mean Jack Kennedy, right?
Yes.
Sure.
Well, he's the person that got me down to Washington, of course. I was a senior when he made that inauguration speech asking folks to do something for their country rather than the country do something for them. It was a tragedy. It was a tragedy all the more so because the deep state was involved, was responsible for it. And, there's a terrific book I can recommend. I've read lots of them, but this is the best. JFK and the Unspeakable.
I read it.
By James Douglas. He's got it all together. And it's a sad thing to read, but it's very convincing. So do presidents since John Kennedy have to worry about their back? Yeah, they do. Do they? Yes, they do. Is the Secret Service, can it be penetrated? Yes, it can. It was under John Kennedy. So people like Reagan and others are very, very careful, had their trustees protect them and didn't do anything that went far beyond what the deep state wanted them to do. So yeah, it's a real problem. It's even more problem now. I talked about the Mickey Bat. Well, that's part of the deep state, of course. The whole thing fits together. If Joe Biden wanted to leave Afghanistan, do you think he could?
Probably not.
He can, but it's going to be a terrible political price. Why? Well, because he lost Afghanistan. Who is responsible for all that? The Mickey Mat, especially the M, the military. You ought to take those generals. You ought to take those generals that told Obama, yeah, just 10,000 more troops, not just 30,000 more troops. And then they get an extra little star on their lapel. And they don't give a rat's patootie about the soldiers that work for them. We have almost 3,000 soldiers killed there. Afghans, hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
For what? So if Biden needs to defend himself, and he will, he needs to have the courage to say, look, This is what Bobby Gates, the Secretary of Defense, encouraged. This is what Hillary Clinton encouraged. This is what Petraeus and McChrystal and all those guys. Oh, yeah, you're right around the corner, just like Vietnam. It's crazy to watch this sort of stuff. They ought to be held account, the more so for their cynical attitude. You know, Robert Gates, he used to work for me, I should say up front, back in the 70s. To see him as Secretary of Defense after slopping over into the Obama regime and being responsible for more and more thousands of troops into Afghanistan, he had the temerity in a major speech at West Point to say, you know, if I were advising a subsequent president about getting involved in Asia, I would say what Douglas MacArthur said, to get involved in the land war in Asia is just crazy. Huh? You know, this stuff is really bad. If you watch these people, you see what they do. And then when it goes really upside down, they say, well, you know, I'd advise, you know, MacArthur said, don't get involved in a war in Asia. Oh, don't get me started.
My grandfather is 93. He did serve in the Pacific, and he likes to talk about how MacArthur was very adamant at the end of the war about going in to all of the Southeastern Asian countries and taking out all the communists, basically just killing them all. And you know, Harry Truman, he has his good points, he has his bad points, but when he left office, he had a 22% approval rating. And I would like to think that a lot of the reason why his approval rating was so bad, him
You're
look
freezing.
Like, I'm freezing.
You froze, but I'm going to say I think maybe his approval rating was low because of the mass murder of, you know, hundreds of thousands of people and the forever radiation poisoning. I'm going to go with that. Maybe that's
that did play a role, but the truth of the matter is, and this is the biggest difference between the Americans and the Russians were willing to die for their country. Americans, not as much. So dropping an atomic bomb versus having a ground war that would have taken six-figure deaths of the United States military is not something the American people felt prepared to do, because the Japanese were certainly prepared to do it. So they did drop the bomb, but the reason why he caught so much heat is because there was this threat of communism, because we had this relationship with Russia that was, you know, tedious at best. And then once World War II is over, it's like, oh, well, you know what? Now we're a global power. We got to keep the machine going. So now it becomes this Cold War. And the whole idea was to basically, you know, take out Laos, take out Cambodia, take out Thailand, take out Vietnam. And by not doing that, you know, Truman basically put himself in a position where, you know, he was just branded essentially as a loser of a president. History has been more kind to him ever since then, but he walked out of office with a horrifically bad approval rating, George W. Bush level approval rating. And I'm curious, from your perspective, if that had a lot to do with the way that, you know, the MIC more or less branded him by not agreeing with MacArthur to do what he had suggested.
Well, Peter, I guess we differ on many things here. I think MacArthur was crazy.
I am 100% with you on that.
He wanted to bomb China in 1958. All those folks were ready to bomb China. Southeast Asia, where's Southeast Asia now? We lost. Is it communist? Well, I suppose, but the Vietnamese are making most of our clothes and we're trading with them and so forth. More important, Peter, with respect to bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the people who know about all this and the documents show that MacArthur, Eisenhower, the naval guy who was head of the chief of staff, all those folks were dead set against it. Why? Because they knew that the Japanese were ready to surrender. Okay? They knew that because they intercepted Japanese communications. So The only two people that wanted to use that terrible weapon were Truman and Jimmy Burns, his Secretary of State from the great state of North Carolina. Truman and
That's ironic.
Jimmy Burns and Truman were bigots to begin with. They referred to blacks with the N-word all the time. And these people out there in Japan, they weren't worth a damn. They were just as bad as blacks, right? And so racism played a big part in that. But the big deal was to prevent Russia from coming in. They were ready to come in, and we wanted to show them the might of our atomic warfare and to prevent them from coming into Japan. The thing, I was exposed to this fable that American troops were saved by the explosion of these bombs. That happens not to be true.
Peter, didn't you watch Oliver Stone's movie? Didn't you watch that? Watch the series, man.
I did, but there's
he spelled this whole thing out that's just not true. That why we did that is not true. It was unnecessary, and Truman knew it was unnecessary, and he did it anyway.
Yes, but not everybody watches Oliver Stone, and there are a lot of people who still have this misconception of the ground war that would have been pending. And again, this is how history is told from a perspective of the victors who are in control of the narrative. It doesn't mean that that's what the truth is. That's just what we've been fed.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And interestingly, everybody, just because we're talking about this, on Monday, we're going to be speaking with Daniel Scherzen, who is going to be coming on and talking about his book, A True History of the United States, which I call it reading. I do it audible. Can I still call it reading if I'm not really reading, if I'm listening? But anyway, I've been listening to the book, and it reminds me of like a more contemporary version of Zinn. It's very like fact-based from the perspective of not the victor. So I will be talking about that on Monday.
That'd be
anyway,
great.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm doing the best I can to try to educate as much as possible. But when we were talking about you were talking about Gates and seeing him in that position, and it makes me think of other people that are in positions that they ought not be, which brings me to one of my moments that for me, meeting you is really kind of a little fangirly. I feel very similar, Peter, to how I did when I met Medea. Do you remember when I met Medea and I was all kind of giddy? So when you spoke out at Gina Haspel's confirmation hearing, that was something that really spoke to me. And I was and how you were treated was, to me, seemingly par for the course for them. But the fact that you did that. So if you would talk a little bit about why you were speaking out about that, because everybody was celebrating we're having the first female head of the CIA. And I wasn't feeling so celebratory about that. But if you could share, because to me, for people who didn't realize, you can look this up on YouTube. You could watch Ray, badass, being dragged out of the Senate hearing, confirmation hearing. And would you talk a little bit about the history there and why you were opposing that?
Yeah, sure I can. I suppose I should let people know for context here that I'm described as a CIA officer, but there are really two CIAs, okay? There's the one that Truman intended, a kind of a analysis group that would be able to evaluate things without fear or favor and serve up to him reports and analysis, as he put it, without treatment, okay? In other words, he knew that from the Pentagon, he'd always hear that the Soviets were 10 feet high. He knew that the State Department would always be defending its policies. He wanted some people working directly for him with no political agenda, where he could go and say, McGovern, you tell me what you really think. Are there weapons of mass destruction there in Iraq or not? Okay?
Right.
The way things evolved, that turned out to be a fiasco. But in those days, back in the day, if you will, that's why I joined, and that's what we did. So the analysis part of the CIA was hermetically sealed off from the operations part. And actually, there were turnstiles in every floor of the building where you couldn't go to I couldn't go to the operations part, and vice versa. So that needs to be understood to understand your question and the answer that I will give to it as soon as you remind me about what the question was.
I just was wanting you to give your background on why you felt it was so important to speak out at the confirmation hearing for her. I mean, I know and you know, but like Peter said, probably a lot of people watching, and yeah, I know that she's not there anymore, thankfully, but just the importance of what that meant that she got that appointment.
Well, people should know, if they don't already know, that she was a known torturer. She was in charge of the first black site in Thailand, where two of the so-called terrorists were waterboarded, as well as used other techniques. One of them 187 times, I believe. She was, what do they call her?
Bloody Gina.
Bloody Gina, yeah, okay. That's John Kiriakou, my friend who was on the operational side. So here she walks in to a Senate confirmation hearing in the committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee. And after her and beside her are people I used to work with. Good people. People who I knew. People who prepared the president's daily brief with me. And I said, my God, what the hell's going on here? And, it was just, I had already given back my big medallion that I got, that retirement for exemplary service, or the Exceptional Service Award or something. I had already thrown that back at the head of the House Intelligence Committee in Congress because of torture. I mean, torture is beyond the pale. And so, here I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at all these senators. All of them know that she ran that torture site. Okay. And I'm saying, my God, they know the story. Why could they possibly confirm her? And one of the senators, I guess it was Dianne Feinstein, said something which gave me an opening. And so I walked up to the front of the gallery there, and I said, please excuse me for a second. I'd just like to point out blah, blah, blah. And I said, she's a known torturer. She was, and you know that. She was in charge of that base in Thailand. You all know that. And you're going to approve her to be head of the CIA. And then, of course, I was grabbed and manhandled and spent a very tough night, actually, that night in D.C. jail. So that's what motivated me. I mean, torture cannot be justified under any condition. There, as I learned in ethics, there are three main evils that are called intrinsic. They're always evil. One is slavery, one is rape, and one is torture, for God's sake. And to see that my friends there were hovering around Gina Haspel as if they owed her a debt of gratitude for waterboarding.
Shouldn't she have been in prison? I would think that would be punishable. I would think that she should be in prison, but
Well, she should be, but as you know, the U.S. is not going to do it, and we don't belong to the World Court. So who's going to get Gina? I imagine she's hunkering down now.
I'm sure she is. But more importantly than any of that is the idea and the fact that it doesn't work. So it's kind of like they can't even show results for what they did. So there's no there. And I don't know if anybody on here would think that works, but if you could, I know that you have cited before where we know for a fact that it does not work, the information that you get from torturing people. If you would talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the only good results you get from it are fabricated results. If you want to say that Saddam Hussein is in cahoots with Al-Qaeda, give your captive to the Egyptian service. They know how to get people to say what you need them to say. I mean, it's so cynical. You can't get accurate information from torture. And that long Senate Intelligence Committee study, which actually was completed, where Dianne Feinstein finally stood up for her staff and insisted that that thing be completed just before she was removed as chair of that committee. That showed chapter and verse from CIA own correspondence that they falsified the information to make it appear that they got some good results from the torture, whereas actually they got no good results, many false leads. And unless you really want to get somebody to say something, then torture, you want to get them to say the right thing. Send them to the Egyptians, send them to the Jordanians, send them to other Israelis, friendly services. They know how to do this, and they did. So, it's just so, I mean, as you can probably tell, it's beyond the pale. It's not.
How do you reconcile? Like, you're obviously someone with a pretty good moral compass, and I think about like the idea of people like you, and as John Kiriakou as well. I like him very much. I've interviewed him, and he's amazing. I don't understand how you reconcile being on the inside of that when you were seeing the kind of stuff you were seeing, like how hard that must be. Like what was it where you were finally like, yeah, this is not great?
Well, I mentioned, I think, that there are two CIAs.
Yeah.
And that we were hermetically sealed, one off against the other, that there were turnstiles in the building. So what I learned about what was going on, for example, in Latin America, was only what I saw in the New York Times, which used to actually publish stuff like that. So, it wasn't really a moral issue for me. Now it is. After I left, and this is 30 years ago, when I saw what was going on, and I could see, for example, that my former colleagues had been suborned into falsifying, into creating intelligence to justify a war of aggression. I don't think any worse than that, And you don't have to take it from me. Again, a Senate Select Committee on Intelligence looked into that for 4 years, and in 2005 concluded that the intelligence ginned up to justify, in quotes, the attack on Iraq was not corroborated and even non-existent was the word, non-existent. So what does non-existent intelligence look like? Looks like manufactured intelligence to justify a war. And I know some of the people who did that, and that's really painful because they were my friends. And, it's hard to look them in the face anymore. A lot of them are gone, or a lot of them are dead. But my God, how it shouldn't be such a unique reaction. But I'm afraid that a lot of my former friends went with the notion that, well, we did what we can because 9/11 was so terrible, and we just were doing our job, and we just followed orders, right? Following orders. That's the Bloomberg principle.
Speaking with Ray McGovern, former CIA officer, one of the things that I think a lot of people probably don't understand is the mindset it takes to be a CIA officer, to be in the shadow government. I'm curious if, just from your personal experience, whether through yourself or through others, I just think that, you kind of have to lack empathy in a lot of ways. You kind of have to have this benevolent view of, the United States, and what we do is always right and always a means to an end. Otherwise, how could you work for the CIA? I think that there are people that, they rationalize what they do, that there is a good reason behind all of which takes place. Do you find that is the case, that they really do believe in the sanctity of what they're trying to accomplish, or do you think they recognize just how destructive they are overall, not just to the American way of life, but the way we are to the rest of the world?
Well, again, I have to draw a distinction. In the analysis part of the CIA, we had free rein to analyze just about everything there was, open sources and satellite photography, intercepted communications. And it was our job to make some sense out of that and to tell the president what was going on. In addition to all that, when arms control negotiations happened, and they happened big time in 1971, 1972. I was chief of the Soviet Foreign Policy Branch, and I seconded three of my best analysts, one of whom was Bobby Gates, to support the SALT delegation, Strategic Arms Limitation Talks delegation. Now, we did that, and in 1972, I was in Moscow for the signing of the SALT I negotiations, the SALT Treaty, the ABM Treaty, which was the cornerstone for strategic stability from 1972 right down to 2002, when George W. Bush got out of the treaty. Now, what was CIA's role there? Well, number one, the president wanted to know, Nixon in this case, whether we thought the Russians were serious. So we said, yes, the way you've played off the Chinese against the Russians, they are very serious. They want to come to an accommodation with you. They want détente and they want rapprochement. Whoa, okay. Well, now, if we sign this piece of paper, can you verify it? Can you make sure you tell us exactly if the Russians are cheating? And we would say, well, how soon do you have to know? 2 weeks. Well, we go back to our specialists, our satellite folks and everything else, and we went back to Nixon and Kissinger and said, yes, 2 weeks, we could do it. Now, that enabled, because of our capabilities for collection and analysis, that enabled that treaty, cornerstone treaty. Now, did the Soviets cheat? Yeah, they tried. They cheated. In 1983, our imagery satellites found a monster ABM radar in a place called Krasnoyarsk in Middle Siberia. The Russians weren't allowed an extra monumental, terrific big radar, ABM radar. And so President Reagan called them on it. Said, look, we have some photos we'd like to show you. What are you doing here? You got to tear them down. You know, tear the Berlin Wall down. Well, tear this ABM radar from Krasnoyarsk down too. Well, the Russians demurred. But in those days, there was something called, what was it called? Negotiations. Yeah, I think that's the word. And we talked to them for 6 years. And by the time Reagan had left, George H.W. Bush came in, 1989. The Russians said, all right, you're right. Pictures don't lie. We'll tear it down. And they tore it down. What's the point of all this? Well, we can verify if there's a modicum of trust between the Russians and the Americans. Right now, Biden says we're not going to trust anybody. His spokesperson says, we don't do it. It's not about trust. It's not about trust. The Russians have to change the way they behave. And then maybe we'll talk about trust. It's crazy. It's really crazy now. But in those days, CIA's role was really, really a force for peace. Now, this other business about, there was this communist scare, right? Everybody said, well, what we got to do is prevent Southeast Asia from falling to the communists. Well, the smart people, and a lot of those people were the analysis people, say, Vietnam doesn't matter. I mean, dominoes, Indonesia, come on, that's not going to happen. But it was really hard to get anybody's ear because the politics were such that you could possibly lose China or lose Indochina to the communists.
How much of an influence did Joe McCarthy actually have, or was he more or less a mouthpiece for, the MIC?
For the what? For the
military-industrial complex.
Well, he was worse. He was really, really bad. I remember as a high school student listening to fierce debates about McCarthy in the living room, There were people that were convinced he was really, really good defending us against communism. And there were others that saw through him completely. He did a lot of damage. He did a whole lot of damage to the State Department and to the cadre of specialists within the government that were afraid silly about telling the truth about Russia, how powerful it was, or how do what everyone said it could do. It was really, really bad, and he decimated the Chinese experts in the State Department. So he was terrible news. Not only that, but I grew up in that whole era, and when people like Gene Kelly, I mean, how he can dance, how he can sing, what a terrific acting. Gene Kelly was smeared as being pro-communist. I was conditioned. Me, really smart guy, right? I was conditioned. Whenever I saw Gene Kelly, oh my God, no. Oh, but he's pro-communist. My God, that's an awful thing to do to a young person,
Yeah.
And, if I were around in those days and I saw a lot about what was going on in our imperialist society, and I, held no brief to Stalin, but when I saw Gorbachev and those reforms and stuff, and I saw that Gorbachev and then later Putin were bringing a lot of Russians out of poverty, and Xi in China doing exactly the same thing, there's a lot to be said for systems other than capitalism.
And we're still doing this. Like, we're still doing it. We're still harping on the Russia thing. And what's so interesting to me about it is they no longer even have the ability to say it's a communism thing. So I don't understand it anymore. Okay, so back then it was, oh, it's communism. That's bad. That's a threat. Okay, well, now they're not communist anymore. They have oligarchs. We have oligarchs. Really, does it matter? And so, like, I just, to me, feel like I don't care whether my oligarchs are Chinese, Russian, or American. It really doesn't matter to me. And it's just fascinating that we're still able to have this Red Scare thing when I don't understand I say to people, what do you think is going to happen? Like, the Russians are going to come up on the shores and try to take over. And like, what is it that you think people are scared of about Russia? Like, I don't understand what they think is so bad there.
Okay, well, it's the Mickey Mat, all right?
Yeah.
You need an enemy. I mean, you can't justify $1 trillion a year to go to defense without a credible enemy. That's it, pure and simple. Now, under the second George Bush, you had Al-Qaeda, you had insurgents, you had terrorists and all, but pretty much they faded, okay? So you needed an enemy. What happens? Well, in 2013, it looked like Obama was going to succumb to the blandishments of Putin. I say that jovially, right?
Yeah.
What am I talking about? Well, in August of 2012, as the CIA and others were already involved in Syria, Obama was mousetrapped at a press conference. He was asked, look, you say you're not going to intervene seriously with arms in Syria. Are there no conditions under which you would do that? And he was slipped a piece of paper. And he said, well, yeah, if the Syrians used chemical,
Right.
What? Or even just move them from place to place, that would change my calculus. That would change my outlook about intervention. That was August 20th, 2012. Guess what? August 21st, 2013, there's a sarin attack chemical outside of Damascus.
Yep.
John Kerry gets up 35 times, count them, 35 times at the State Department. He rings the rafters and says, Saddam Hussein, this is a Freudian slip, Bashar al-Assad, 35 times. He did this as a terrible thing. Bashar al-Assad didn't do that. No, it was a false flag. Bashar al-Assad's army was winning, and the rebels needed some way to stop it. And so they did this sarin attack, and they blamed it on Bashar al-Assad. Now, what happened? Obama is under great pressure, as he admits later, by all his advisors, including Biden. He has to retaliate now. Why? Because a year previous, remember the press conference? He laid down a red line. He said, this would change my calculation. This would be a red line. And so they're all saying, red line, red line, red line. You got to retaliate against Syria. What happens? Well, John Kerry is off somewhere else in the world. But Obama goes up to visit St. Petersburg with Putin and other people there for an economic summit. Okay, Putin takes him aside and says, "Look, Mr. Obama, remember when we were together in Northern Ireland in June and we set up that working group to get Syrian chemical weapons destroyed?" Obama said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, the Syrians have agreed to destroy all their chemical weapons." Obama says, "Really?" And Putin says, "Yeah, watch TV tomorrow because the Syrian foreign minister is going to announce that. That would get you off the hook. We could have it done under UN inspection on one of those U.S. ships that you have outrigged, especially for the destruction of chemical. What do you think?" "Oh, yeah, that sounds really good." Obama comes home, right? Now, in the midst of all this, 2 days before Obama comes home, John Kerry's in London. And he's saying, we have to retaliate. We have to retaliate for the use of these chemical weapons. We have to retaliate, right? And then he gets a call on the phone. "Hi, this is President Obama. Guess what? We don't really have to retaliate because Putin has worked out this deal with the Syrians. They're going to destroy." Oh, okay. So what's my point here? In the wake of this, on September 11th, 2013, September 11th is just a coincidence, Putin has an op-ed published in the New York Times. And what does he say? He says, my relationship with the U.S. and personally with President Obama has been marked by growing trust. I welcome this very much. The only thing I disagree with President Obama is on the notion that one country is exceptional, more exceptional than the others. I think that all countries are equal under God, and that whether they're closer to democracy or fighting their way to democracy, God looks on all these people as equal. Now, I was reliably informed at the time that Putin wrote that last paragraph into the op-ed. That was proven 3 years ago when where he said exactly the same words in an extemporaneous response to a question. So what did that mean? Whoa, that meant trust. That meant Obama didn't give us the war we wanted against Syria. That meant that the neocons had to retaliate, had to do something to blacken Russia. And what did they do? They set up the coup in Kiev, Ukraine, which happened on February 22nd, 2014. So do the math, 6 or 7 months after this op-ed in the New York Times. Well, now, they knew, if they didn't know, they didn't know anything about Russia, that Russia wasn't going to allow its only ice-free naval base in Sevastopol in Crimea to go to the Ukrainians who were being now subsumed under NATO for all intents and purposes. So the Russians reacted by holding a plebiscite in Crimea and annexing it, okay? And they protected the people of Russian stock in those eastern provinces there called the Donbass. Well, what was that? That was a Russian invasion of Ukraine. That was a Russian invasion of Crimea. And that was what was held out to everyone, especially the West Europeans. The East Europeans, you have to have sanctions. And then it started going down and down and down from there. And we had our enemy back. No trust anymore. None of this idle talk about working things out together. We had the enemy that the Mickey Mat can't survive without.
So how realistic is it?
Is what?
That's an enemy. I'm hearing feedback now.
You're getting bad feedback.
Well, it's not realistic at all.
Exactly.
A little bit about Russia. The notion that Russia is going to invade Western Europe is hogwash. The notion the Russians are coming here, like that lawyer from Stanford said at one of those hearings, we better get them in our Ukraine rather than get them here when they come, I mean, it's ludicrous. The level of discussion in the media The basic assumption is the Russians did all this stuff, including all these cyber attacks and all that kind of stuff. I just wrote a piece. It'll appear tomorrow morning in antiwar.com. But it addresses this business about Biden being under great pressure now from people like David Sanger in the New York Times to show that he has cojones, okay? Free translation from the Spanish is manliness. Okay?
Yeah, we know what cojones is. We're South Florida. We're all about it.
I know, but for your audience, okay? So what's he got to do? He's got to retaliate. Retaliate for what? For all these cyber attacks. Well, who did the cyber attacks? It is reported the Russians are charged with. Some people who are clued in on this tell us there's no proof. What would the Russians want ransomware for? So what I'm saying here is that Biden is being mousetrapped in exactly the same way that they tried to mousetrap Obama into retaliating for a false flag sarin attack in Syria back in 2013. And I'm hoping maybe one of Biden's advisors will read this thing. The last part of my piece has to do with, well, who could be doing all this cyber attacking with Russian language? Oh, well, you wouldn't read this in the New York Times because the Times wouldn't publish it. But in 2017, WikiLeaks divulged a whole category of offensive cyber tools developed by the CIA with the help of the NSA, one of which, called Marble Framework, allows the CIA to hack into a computer or server, disguise who it was that hacked in, and attribute it to, well, they worked in 5 languages: Chinese, Persian, Arabic, Korean, and you guessed it, Russian. Okay? Now, this whole thing was called Vault 7, Marble Framework. Now, guess what it cost? Well, it was 700 million. I'll say it again. 700 million lines of code. Now, I don't know much about this, but we have 2 technical directors, former technical directors from the NSA in our veteran intelligence professionals for Sanity. So I asked Bill Binney, Bill, 700 million lines of code, that seems like a lot, Bill. He said, right, that's a lot. Can you still do multiplication, right? Yeah, I can. Well, each line of code costs $25. Okay. Do the math. If you just use 100, just use 100 million of those lines of code, it's going to cost you $2.5 billion. Who has this kind of money? Oh, the deep state has it, NSA has it, CIA has it. Multiply that by 7. So, what I'm suggesting in this piece is that might have looked elsewhere for this Russian hacking. It could actually be people very close to home, like maybe in Langley or up there by Fort Meade in NSA. And I kid you not, I wouldn't dare say that if I didn't have the corroboration of 2 former NSA technical directors and a fellow who managed cyber for IBM for 3 decades. Those people are incredible advisors to us. And so I'm suggesting in this thing, look, President Biden, don't get mousetrapped like they tried to do to Obama. And besides, you really ought to ask CIA, you really ought to ask Bill Burns to look into this, because it's altogether possible that since they don't really have a need to know, like you, Biden, and Bill Burns, the head of the CIA now, that they don't know. In other words, this Russian hacking could be done by folks I used to work with.
We're having this conversation and it's very in depth. And I think about the average person who listens to a foreign policy correspondent on, let's say, CNN or MSNBC or even Fox News. And to me, I think it speaks to just how ill-informed, especially about foreign policy, that the average American voter tends to be, despite the fact they think they're well-informed, as you were alluding to earlier. Well, I read the New York Times and I know. What would you say is the biggest misconception that the average political person has when it comes to foreign policy? And what is something that you think we could learn from in regards to, when we hear something, we can recognize that, no, this is actually not true. This is the PR information that they are giving, but in reality, it's the furthest thing from the truth.
Good question, Peter. A really good question. I would say that we don't live in a zero-sum world. The fact that China is becoming more and more powerful, the fact that they lifted 100 million people out of poverty in the last decade or so, that's no threat to us. The fact that Russia has recovered now under Putin after being actually plundered by those Harvard boys that Washington sent into Russia in the 90s after the Soviet Union fell apart, that's not a threat to us either. So this whole zero-sum attitude got to change. The Chinese actually have said this explicitly. It's not a zero-sum. I'm going to give you a little vignette here, which I think speaks to this problem. I have lots of grandchildren, 10 now. And when I was visiting the nursery school of a little grandson, I saw that these little kids were so well behaved, 4 years old, and they're sharing things, and no fights for 2 hours. I couldn't believe it. So I asked the teacher, I said, how do you keep these kids this way? She says, Mr. McGovern, come with me. So we go into her little conference room. She said, please sit down. So I sit down. She says, now, how many chairs do you have around this table? I said, 4. She said, well, how many toys on the table? 2. That's it, Mr. McGovern. So I said, traduisez, s'il vous plaît? What do you mean? She said, we teach them that they have to share. Now, if we don't get it through our noggins at this point in our planet's history, you have to share. You have to cooperate so that our grandchildren have a decent planet to live on. Well, that's crazy if we can't do that. We have to share. We have to get out of this zero-sum mentality where every advance by the Chinese is something bad for us. Why can't we just live and let live? I mean, what happened to that? What happened to negotiating our differences? We've got to have a whole, what used to be called a metanoia, from the Greek. Nous meaning mind, meta adding force, it means turn your mind upside down and stop thinking about hoarding. Stop thinking about taking more than is your share, especially on this planet. And
you're starting to sound like a socialist, Ray. We can't have that kind of talk here. We're going to get, that's it. We can't have that. You're talking about sharing and we can't, that's just crazy talk here, man.
Well, I'll add to that because I'm a Catholic, right? But I'm not the kind of Catholic one normally thinks about. I follow the U.S. Catholic bishops way back in the 70s who said, and I quote, no one is entitled to amass more of what he or she does not need when others lack the bare necessities of life, period, end quote. Well, if that's socialism, that's me, man. I really like that kind of socialism. And of course, the guy I try to follow, Jesus of Nazareth, was pretty much the promoter of all that. So, this is really important stuff. Yeah, that if we can't learn to share this kind of stuff, if we can't get out from this business of having oligarchs and people who have multi-millions or billions of dollars while others have not the bare necessities of life, Well, if that's socialism, works really well in Scandinavia, why couldn't it work here? Simple answer, greed.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Agreed.
that is a great transition to what I think is a very important question. You know, a lot of people look at our government, particularly our elected representatives. Jen ran for Congress against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who I think is one of the worst we have, but there are plenty of them. It seems to me that none of them actually ever go down, though, and a lot of them have a lot of dirt under their fingernails, and it seems that that we are entering a new political era. I do believe that, but what I also believe is that a lot of the old guard is not going away easily, and I think part of that is because there is this. It's kind of like a code of silence, if you will, that we're all looking out for each other. If one goes down, we all go down, and not that everybody has skeletons in their closet, but it does seem that despite the fact that Congress has such a terrible approval rating, very little turnover ultimately ends up happening. And I'm thinking that there has to be something to this idea that when you are knee deep in the establishment, regardless of where you stand politically, if you are a Democrat or a Republican, it doesn't matter. For the cameras, it looks like you hate each other, but behind closed doors or in one of those underground speakeasies that people pretend don't exist in DC, they all go and have a laugh. It's like, oh yeah, we got him today. We'll come up with an even better story tomorrow. But
it's like professional wrestling.
Yeah, it is. That's what I think.
If you get money out of politics, that would do it.
That's the whole theme of our existence. That's basically the whole premise of why we're here.
If you are a candidate and or you're a representative and you take corporate special interest money, that you should be cast out like a leper. That's how this has to be treated, as far as I'm concerned.
Because well, I agree. That's quite a tall order, though. You gotta get. There are more of us than there are of them.
There is. And what's interesting is that while you do have New York, I think is a very interesting place right now. I actually think, as I had alluded to with previous guests on the show, and something I like to talk about a lot, I do think AOC justifiably gets some flack for what she does, but I also think she doesn't get enough credit for what she did to change the dynamic in New York City. By unseating Crowley, she completely opened up this opportunity for so many non-corporate representatives, whether through now city council. You have two other solid congressional representatives in Jamal Bowman and Mondaire Jones. There could be potential others. We're obviously big supporters of Melanie DeRigo and Isaiah James. There are good people that are attempting to make this change. And I think that should be the sign of encouragement. Even if AOC isn't necessarily doing everything that you want on Capitol Hill, what is taking place in her backyard, in the Bronx, in Queens, and so on, the change is actually happening, and you can see it now with a lot of these smaller victories. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the future is bright for this non-corporate movement in politics?
Well, I have to have hope, and there are these hopeful signs. If we could get money out of politics, that would be the real challenge. I like AOC. I think that some of her colleagues are really gutsy people. They have already made a difference. So I'm rooting for them. I think we have to recognize the obstacles in their way as well.
Yeah, when you have 435 congressional seats in the United States and currently have maybe a dozen seats that are not owned by corporate special interests, that is a very tough order, a very tough mountain to climb. It doesn't mean you can't climb it, but this is a fight that I think people have to recognize that they have to be in for the long haul. And I think that that's the thing that, and it can be done. I don't think it can't not be. I wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here doing what we're doing if we didn't think it was possible. But obviously there's still a lot more work to be done at the ground level. And I think that while a lot of people are desperate and they really want to see something happen immediately, I also believe that we're in a much different place now than we were just 5 years ago. I think the fact that people do talk about the deep state in the capacity that they talk about means that they're not necessarily able to hide as much of their nefarious behavior as they once did. I think a lot more people now are aware of their tricks, and not that they won't have new ones. I think that the congressional and even senator representatives we have, I don't think they're the sharpest knives in the tool shed. I don't. But I think that the people who have worked in your line of work, they are smart and they know how to trick people. But I also think we're getting to the point now where people are more suspicious than they are accepting. And maybe it is a generational divide in some respects. Technology provides that. So where you stand as far as this notion that we are entering a new age of, you want to say enlightenment? I'm fine with that. I do think that there is sort of an awakening amongst most people that look at the way things have been done and they're saying, I don't want to do it like that anymore. I actually think we are worthy of universal health care. We are worthy of having a living wage and living in dignity with cost, effective housing. I think that the war on drugs is a joke. I think that the foreign wars are an even bigger joke. And I think if we do not band together as one people on this planet, we're not going to be able to live on this planet. So we better figure out a way to make a Green New Deal possible. Is what I'm saying resonating from your perspective as far as where we may ultimately be heading if we do continue to become enlightened as to how things are and what we could do to fight back against it?
Well, I think you're sounding like Bernie Sanders, and I like that a lot. I like Bernie.
Do you really want me to sound like Bernie Sanders?
Oh, God, no. Why would you do that?
It's because it's fun. I can do it.
Well, what happened to Bernie?
I think if you know, please share.
Well, what I mean is, how did he get iced out? How did he get excluded from being the Democratic candidate in 2016?
It was the Russians, of course.
Well, no. Well, yeah, that's. But I guess what people need to know is that Hillary Clinton stacked the deck against him. The Democratic National Committee made sure that he couldn't possibly be the Democratic candidate. Now, how do I know that? Oh, I know that because I've read the emails from the Democratic National Committee that were released and published by WikiLeaks. Were they authentic? WikiLeaks has not published anything that is inauthentic. What did they say? They say that Hillary stole the nomination from Bernie Sanders. Now, how come people don't know about that? Well, because Hillary is really clever. And as soon as she saw that those emails were going to be released by WikiLeaks, she held a council of war. And she said, oh, this is awful. This is even before the convention. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Oh, this is awful, because they'll see what we did to Bernie. And somebody says, I got an idea. What is it? Let's blame it on the Russians. She says, blame it on the Russians, but it wasn't the Russians, it was WikiLeaks. That's okay. We hate WikiLeaks as much as we hate the Russians. Why don't we say that the Russians stole those emails and gave them to WikiLeaks? Hillary says, any better ideas? No? Okay, let's go with it. Now we know she went with it. On the 26th of July, in the midst of the Democratic National Convention, she authorized this fable to take hold. I heard her PR person, Jennifer Palmieri,
yeah.
a month later say, we got this news to go around with our golf carts to all the outlets and to the CNN and all that, and peddle this message that the Russians interfered, Putin himself, and they want Hillary to lose. And we had trouble I had trouble understanding that, but we tried. But then when we go back to Brooklyn, then some correspondents who have close ties with the intelligence services and some of the intelligence people themselves briefed us on what the Russians were doing. And then we were off and running. Now, what was the whole point of that thing? The whole point of that thing was to create a magnificent diversion from the substance of those emails, okay? I mean, the five top people on the DNC quit when they were, okay? What does that tell you? To deflect attention from the substance and say, the Russians, why the Russians? What was the New York Times? Oh, why did the Russians do this? Why did the Russians do this? So, that's what people have to contend with. And, the New York Times and all those people led the charge. And they thought that, that this would work. Now, why didn't it work for Hillary? Now, this is a little bit tangential, but I think it's really interesting. Hillary was let off scot-free by using her unclassified computers for highly classified,
Yes,
including top secret code word material. Okay, they let her off. James Comey let her off. Okay, now just on the 28th of October, just a week or so before the election in 2016. People in New York said, whoops, we got this other computer here that belongs to, what was his name?
Anthony Weiner.
Yeah, Anthony Weiner. And he's got some of his wife's emails on here. And so the people in New York said, we have to look into those. Look, Comey, you promised Congress that you'd look into everything. And so Comey sizes up the situation. Says, all right, well, Hillary's going to win anyway. He says this in his book. He says, I was operating in an environment in which Hillary Clinton was sure to be the next president of the United States, period, end quote. And so I'll make an announcement that we're looking into these new emails. Now, that caused quite a stir, didn't it? Right before the election. Guess what? The polls, those clerks that run the polling outfits, didn't know enough to do what they call what's necessary when an exogenous event happens. In other words, something out of the blue happens. You have to start from scratch. You can't go in the old polls. Okay, right. They didn't do that. They said, well, Hillary's still going to win. Hillary didn't bother to go to the Midwest, and so Hillary lost. Now, Comey was really sorry about that. He was accused right away of Hillary, but then they let him off because he was cooperating on other things. Now, just to fast forward 4 years later, what happened 3 weeks before the election in 2020?
They had the information on Joe's son,
Right.
and they basically had it, they sabotaged it. And one of the best journalists out there, Glenn Greenwald, tried to basically, he said, listen, I don't have a dog in this fight. The American people have a right to know that the Bidens, frankly, are just as crooked as the Trumps. It doesn't matter if you're a thief and you stole $100 million and the other stole $10 million. You're still a thief. And if the American people have a right to know that, they have a right to know it. But as you can attest, the deep state said, no, we want Joe Biden as our next president, and you are not getting in the way of this.
Well, even as much as I know about the deep state and how it controls the media, this was shocking to me.
Yeah.
How they could suppress this information, how they could cut off the New York Post Twitter account, everything else, and how they could just flatten this thing down so most Americans never heard about Hunter's emails, which were authentic and which showed that Joe was involved in all this kind of stuff.
These backroom deals with Ukraine and China. And again, as bad as that was, the one in 2016 that really stuck out to me was when Chris Cuomo went on national TV right after the dump and said, you're not allowed to read to the American people. You are not allowed to read these emails. And I'm thinking, this is 1984. Like, we literally are living within 1984. You have Big Brother right on screen telling you read these emails and you're going to pay dearly for it. And I can see this, you can see this, Jen can see this, but there are the overwhelming majority of the people are just not aware of this. And
Well, when I think the shocking thing to me is that 74 million people voted for Trump. Now, I should probably make clear that I hold no brief for Trump. As a matter of fact, I've been saying for years that he is the worst president the United States ever had, bar none. Okay? So why did 74 million people vote for him? And if Hunter Biden's emails came out, could that have affected the outcome? Whoa, that's a big question, right? Now, did I want Biden to win? Well, on the lesser of two evils scale, I suppose I did. Did I publish on Hunter's emails? No, I didn't have the guts of Glenn Greenwald. Why? To keep peace in the family.
oh my God, that's amazing.
You don't like Hillary. You don't like Hillary. You don't like Biden either. Well, it doesn't have to do with who I like. But in that case, I felt, I'm just going to leave it to the Glenn Greenwalds, whom I admire greatly, to do this. So even someone like me, who prides himself on being gutsy as well as objective, sort of muffed that one. I'm not sure that anything McGovern would have said would have changed anything, but still, this is really bad if the media is controlling things. And, I have mixed emotions about keeping Trump off Facebook and Twitter and all. I have really mixed emotions about that.
We're gonna cover that story as it evolves next week in regards to Trump's lawsuit. I think the reason he's doing this is because I think he does intend to run again. I don't think he would do it otherwise. And it's look, we are the United Corporations of America. We are a circus. We thrive on circus behavior and, the constant rotating villain, if you will. And, that is the essence of where our country has been for a long time. But I think little by little, we start chipping away at this. I mean, our channel is horrifically suppressed, as are many others on independent media that speak truth to power. But we're going to keep speaking it because you have to.
Yeah, let me just make a small point here.
Yeah.
This slops over into foreign affairs. Now, nobody's made a big thing of this, but let's say you're Angela Merkel in Germany, or Macron in France, or Putin in Russia. We can't be certain who's going to be president in 3 years.
I have an idea.
It could be Trump again. And so, there's no stability in terms of knowing what's going to be expected of the United States in 3 or 4 years. And so this is a good thing. It makes the Europeans wake up and say, my God, who are we going to deal with? We have to sort of make our arrangements now. And one example of this is that Macron and Merkel have decided, well, they'd like to talk to Putin too. And they're going to. So maybe 76 years after the end of World War II, they'll start acting like adults, because they haven't been acting like adults so far. The Trump shock, as well as the Biden shock, may be enough to do that.
Whatever it's going to take in order for us to continue moving in the right direction in terms of humanity is what it's all about. We're very grateful that you came on the podcast.
See, you're breaking up again. See, you're breaking up again. The studio is, are we dealing with hurricane force winds down there? Is that what you've got?
No, I'm starting. The signal's coming back. The signal's coming back.
Okay, so yeah.
That. Jen, okay, well, either I can wrap it or you wrap it. But
no, Ray, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. I've been a fan for a long time, and I really appreciate it. I could actually talk to you for hours. You're a wealth of information. It's really amazing, and I appreciate that you're still on, speaking out and speaking up. And I think we support anybody who does that.
Well, I'm glad to have been able to share this time with you, and feel free to ask me again if.
Absolutely.
Well, I just wanted to say that I really, really appreciate you, Ray. You've done an amazing service for this country. I really wish I could have been president in 2016, but there weren't enough people that were willing to fight on my behalf to make me president. I hope that I leave a lasting legacy for a lot of people to get involved with politics. That's
Bernie, I'm for you. I'm for you.
That's what I'm talking about. Thank you so much.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Ray.
Thank
Okay.
you, Ray. Means the world.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.